All right, so are you ready to dive back into the world of Stephen King?
Always up for a good scare.
Okay, so you know how much I love a good deep dive. And this one is, well, it's King, so it's going to be good.
Oh, yeah, he's a master, isn't he?
All right, and I mean, just the excerpts that you sent over from If It Bleeds, like you like it darker, and the Dreamers, and especially that Untitled one. Oh man.
Oh, yeah, that one's a real head trip.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly.
I mean, just thinking about those twin boys and that stroller.
Okay, so before we totally freak ourselves out, let's back up a bit.
Okay.
So just to kind of set the stage for our listener.
Sure.
So we've got You Like It Darker with Laird and Butch, these two old friends who go on this annual hunting trip.
Right, every year, same spot, same routine.
Exactly. But this year, things take a turn.
Oh, yeah, a big turn.
Like there are these strange lights in the sky, then they run into this mysterious woman.
Who seems to know a little too much about them.
Right, and then things get really, really weird.
And that's just the beginning.
Okay, so then we've got the Dreamers with Danny, who has this crazy, vivid dream about a buried body.
And it's not just any dream, right? He goes and finds the body exactly where he dreamed it.
Yeah, talk about a nightmare coming true.
Yeah, and of course that just makes him the prime suspect.
Right. I mean, who wouldn't be suspicious?
Exactly.
And then there's that Untitled story, which I don't even know where to begin without giving everything away.
It's a tough one to talk about without spoilers.
But, okay, so let's just say it involves a guy named Vic who's staying at a friend's place in Florida.
Right, nice relaxing vacation.
Yeah, right until he stumbles across a dead woman.
Allie Bell.
Allie Bell, right. And then there are her twin sons.
Who may or may not be ghosts.
And a stroller that moves on its own.
Oh, yeah, that stroller.
So yeah, lots to unpack there.
Definitely.
And what's really interesting is that, like, at first glance, these stories seem totally different.
Right, they're all kind of standalone tales.
But the more I think about them, the more I see these, like, little threads connecting them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like this underlying sense of dread.
Right, like something's not quite right.
And, like, the way King blurs the lines between what's real and what's not.
Oh, yeah, he's a master of that.
Like, Darkers, are those lights actually aliens, or is it some kind of shared hallucination?
Or maybe it's something else entirely.
Right. He never really gives us a straight answer.
And that's what makes it so creepy.
Exactly. And then with Danny's dream, I mean, is it just a coincidence, or is it like a premonition?
Like he's tapping into something beyond our understanding.
Yeah, and then in the Untitled story, Vic has to confront the possibility that maybe ghosts are real.
Which, I mean, who hasn't thought about that at some point, right?
Right, like especially when you're reading Stephen King.
Especially then.
But it's like King is saying that even in our everyday lives, there's this potential for the extraordinary.
Like the supernatural is always lurking just beneath the surface.
Exactly, and it's just waiting for the right moment to break through.
And when it does, oh, man.
Hold
on.
So, yeah, King is definitely playing with our sense of reality in these stories.
Oh, yeah, he's messing with our heads.
But he's also exploring some really deep themes.
Like loss and grief.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, Laird and Butch are clearly struggling with the death of their friend.
And then there's Danny, whose dream is tied to his own troubled past.
Right. Like, it's not just about finding the body. It's about his own personal demons coming back to haunt him.
And Vic, in the Untitled story, he's confronted with the lingering presence of the dead.
With Allie Bell and those twin boys.
It's like King is saying that death isn't always a clean break.
Like sometimes the dead can reach back into the world of the living.
Which is both fascinating and terrifying.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it's something that he explores in a lot of his work.
Okay, so we've got this blurring of reality and perception, this exploration of loss and grief.
And this constant sense of unease.
It's like something bad is always about to happen.
Which, of course, it usually does.
But what's really interesting is that on top of all that, there are these specific details that linked these stories together in even weirder ways.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, like the number 29, for instance, pops up in both You Like It Darker and The Dreamers.
Really? I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, it's in You Like It Darker when Butch checks his watch.
Right.
And in The Dreamers, it's connected to Frank Jalbert's, like, weird counting thing.
His arithmomania.
Right, yeah.
So it's like the same number, but with totally different meanings.
Exactly, and it makes you wonder if King is, like, intentionally planting these little clues.
Like little Easter eggs for his readers.
Right, or maybe it's just a coincidence.
Maybe, but it's still pretty cool.
Okay, and then there's the setting. All three stories take place in these small towns.
Right. Very isolated, very rural.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it creates this atmosphere of like secrets and hidden dangers.
Look, anything could be lurking in the shadows.
Which again is very classic King.
Oh, yeah, he loves those small town settings.
Yeah. And then there's this recurring motif of like childhood innocence juxtaposed with darkness and violence.
Like with the ghost twins and Danny's past and even that young woman in, like, it's darker.
Yeah, it's like King is exploring this idea that innocence is fragile.
Like it can be shattered so easily.
Exactly, and that the darkness is always waiting to consume it.
Which is a pretty bleak outlook.
Yeah, well, it is Stephen King we're talking about.
True.
So, thinking about all these connections, it makes me wonder,
What?
could these characters actually exist in the same fictional universe?
Like a Stephen King multiverse.
Right. I mean, it's not that crazy of an idea.
No, not really.
Like, think about it both, like, Darker and the Dreamers are set in Maine.
Right.
So could those woods where Laird and Butch have their encounter be the same woods where Danny finds the body?
That's an interesting thought.
And then there's that mysterious young woman in... like it Darker?
Like she just appears out of nowhere.
And she seems to know a lot more than she lets on.
Like she has some kind of hidden agenda.
Exactly. So could she be connected to the events in the other stories?
Maybe she's like a recurring character that pops up in different King books.
Whoa, now that would be really cool.
It would, wouldn't it?
It's like King is dropping these little breadcrumbs, inviting us to piece together a larger narrative.
Like a secret story hidden within all his other stories.
And I don't know about you, but I'm totally down for that rabbit hole.
Oh, me too. Count me in.
Like he's built this whole secret world and we get to explore it.
Yeah, it's like being a literary detective.
Okay, but before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I have to bring this up because it's been bugging me.
What's that?
The ending of You Like It Darker?
Well, yeah.
Like when Butch uses that weird light from the case to try and revive Laird.
Right.
And it actually works, but then their watches stop and they realize they've lost time. Like, what's up with that?
It's one of those classic King endings that just leaves you with more questions than answers.
Right. Like, what was in that case?
Yeah, where did it come from?
And what did they actually breathe in?
Like, did they cross over into some other dimension?
It's so creepy.
Oh, yeah. It's like they got a glimpse of something beyond our understanding.
And it ties into another big theme that runs through all three stories.
What's that?
Consequences. Like Laird and Butch, they're forever changed by their experience in the woods.
Right. They've seen something they can't unsee.
And Danny and the Dreamers, he's ostracized and Nogi believes him, even though he's telling the truth.
The truth comes at a cost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Vic, in that untitled story, he's left grappling with the knowledge that the supernatural is real.
And that knowledge is going to stay with him for the rest of his life.
It's like King is saying that encountering the extraordinary always comes with a price. Like you can't just walk away from it unchanged.
It changes you. It changes how you see the world.
Yeah, it makes you question everything you thought you knew.
But even with all the darkness and suspense, King still manages to find moments of humor.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like he can be really funny.
Like in The Dreamers, when Danny's describing Frank Jalbert, the KBI inspector. Right. With his counting compulsion.
Yeah, his arithmomania, it's such a weird quirk.
It makes him both menacing and kind of pathetic at the same time.
Right, like you don't know whether to be scared of him or feel sorry for him.
It's a great example of how King can create these complex characters.
Yeah, he doesn't just write villains and heroes. Everyone is kind of in between.
They're all human with their flaws and their quirks.
Which I think is why his characters feel so real.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay, but speaking of real, that scene in the Untitled story where Vic encounters Allie Bell's body.
Oh, man.
It's horrific.
It's brutal.
But it's also so vivid and cinematic.
You can practically feel the heat of that Florida sun.
And smell the salty air.
And hear the buzzards circling overhead.
Ugh. It's one of those images that's going to stay with me for a while.
Yeah, King knows how to paint a picture.
And it's not just about the gore, it's about the indifference of nature.
Like death can be both sudden and shockingly mundane.
Yeah, like it's just another part of the cycle of life and death.
And it sets the stage for the rest of the story, this collision of the ordinary and the extraordinary.
Like Vic is on vacation trying to relax, and suddenly he's confronted with this gruesome reminder of mortality.
And it just gets weirder from there.
Right, with the stroller moving on its own and the ghost twins.
And Vic's growing feeling that he's losing his grip on reality.
Which makes you wonder, is he actually experiencing these things or is he slowly going mad?
It's a question that King leaves unanswered.
And I think that's part of the brilliance of the story.
Right. It forces us to examine our own assumptions about reality.
And to consider the possibility that there are forces at work that we just can't comprehend.
Exactly. And it connects back to that theme of consequences.
Like Vic's encounter with Allie Bell's death and with the supernatural events that follow have irrevocably changed him.
He's crossed the line and there's no going back.
And I think that's what makes King's work so enduringly popular.
What do you mean?
He doesn't shy away from the darkness, from the uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Well, yeah, he goes right there.
Like, he forces us to confront our own fears, our own anxieties.
And to grapple with the mysteries of the universe.
Exactly. And he does it all with a masterful command of language.
Oh, yeah. He's an amazing writer.
And a gift for creating characters that feel real.
So real.
Okay, so earlier you mentioned that King might be dropping hints about a shared universe in these stories.
Right.
Let's dig into that a little more.
Okay.
What specific clues jumped out at you?
Well, beyond the recurring motifs we've already discussed,
Right.
there are a few intriguing details that point to a deeper connection.
Like what?
For instance, in The Dreamers, Danny mentions visiting his ex-wife in Wichita.
Wichita.
Yeah.
Isn't that where the climax of You Like It Darker takes place?
Exactly.
The scene with the burning barn and the showdown with that mysterious young woman.
It's a small detail, but it makes you wonder if Danny might have crossed paths with Laird and Butch.
Even if they never directly interact in the stories.
Right, like they were in the same place at the same time.
Oh.
It's a possibility.
And in that untitled story, Vic spends a lot of time thinking about his dead son, Tad.
Right.
He mentions a book called Tad's Monster Words. Now, this might be a stretch, but could there be a connection to the monsters that Laird and Butch encounter in the woods?
It's definitely possible.
I mean, King is a master at weaving together seemingly unrelated elements.
Right. He's always playing with our expectations.
So we're not just dealing with shared settings and recurring motifs.
No.
We're also seeing potential connections between characters and even specific objects across these stories.
Precisely.
It's like he's creating a literary puzzle box.
Inviting us to find the hidden connections.
And unlock the secrets of his fictional world.
And it's a world that's full of surprises.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And let's not forget about that strange case in You Like It Darker.
Right. What was inside it?
Where did it come from?
Could it have a connection to the supernatural events in the other two stories?
That's the million-dollar question.
And I think it's one that King deliberately leaves open to interpretation.
He wants us to keep thinking about these stories.
To keep searching for those hidden meanings and connections.
And I think that's what makes his work so engaging.
It's not just entertainment, it's a challenge.
A challenge to our imaginations and our assumptions about the world.
Okay, so to wrap things up for our listener, we've taken a deep dive into 3 seemingly unrelated Stephen King stories.
And discovered that they might be more connected than we initially thought.
But the real fun starts now.
Yeah.
Go back, reread these stories.
Yeah.
And see what you can find.
Pay attention to the details.
The recurring motifs.
The little hints that King drops along the way.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
You might even uncover some connections that we missed.
That's the beauty of a good deep dive.
It's a journey of discovery.
And the best part is it doesn't end when the episode is over.
It's just the beginning.
So keep those reading lights on.
And don't be afraid to let your imagination wander.
And if you have some sources that need a good deep dive, send them our way.
We're always up for a challenge.
Until next time, happy reading. And, sweet dreams. And, there's probably a ton of other connections we haven't even touched on.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there are.
I bet our listener has already spotted some that we've missed.
Totally, that's what's so great about King's work,
Right. There's always something new to discover.
Yeah, even if you've read this story 100 times.
Exactly, it never gets old.
So, for the listener out there, why does all this even matter?
Yeah, good question. It's not like we're getting graded on this or anything.
Right, but why should we care about these connections?
Well, for me, it just makes the whole reading experience so much richer.
Oh, yeah, totally.
When you start to see these connections, it's like this whole new layer of the story opens up.
Like those woods in, Darker, for instance.
Right.
Are they the same woods where Danny finds the body in The Dreamers?
Ooh.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It's like all these stories are overlapping like a Venn diagram of creepiness.
Exactly, like you're getting a glimpse behind the curtain.
Right. Seeing how King constructs his world with all these tiny details that most people probably miss.
It makes you realize, how much thought he puts into his work.
It's not just random, it's all connected.
And it makes you a more active reader, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You're not just passively reading the story. You're, searching for clues, piecing things together.
Like a literary detective.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about shared themes, spooky numbers, even characters maybe crossing paths. But the big question is Stephen King intentionally creating a connected universe across all his books?
Or are we just reading too much into things?
Right. Are we just making stuff up?
That's the big mystery, isn't it?
Think about it. Small towns, dark secrets.
That feeling that something ancient and evil is lurking just out of sight. Those elements pop up all the time in King's work.
It's like he's tapping into this primal fear we all have.
Right, like the world is not as safe and predictable as we like to think it is.
Exactly, like there's always something lurking in the shadows.
So maybe these stories aren't literally connected.
Like there's no direct crossover.
Right, but they all share this same DNA, this same dark energy.
That's what makes King's writing so compelling.
It's like he's created his own genre.
King's world.
Exactly.
All right, so to wrap things up for our listener today,
Okay.
we've taken a deep dive into these 3 Stephen King stories and
We found some pretty crazy connections.
but the real fun starts now, right?
Right.
Go back and reread these stories.
Yeah, see what you can find.
Pay attention to the details, to those little hints that King drops along the way.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
And hey, maybe you'll even find some connections that we missed.
That's what makes this so much fun.
Right. It's a journey of discovery.
And it doesn't end when the episode is over.
Exactly. So keep those reading lights on.
And don't be afraid to let your imagination wander into those dark corners.
And if you have some sources that need a good deep dive,
Send them our way.
we're always up for the challenge. Until next time, happy reading and sweet dreams.
Oh.